All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tavshin Pehei 5785, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shirma Drashos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for this morning, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Baruch Meir's grandfather, Moshe Mendel ben Zev, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning Li'ili in the zechus of our precious hostages. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu Me'eretz Hashem continue to bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and in the success of our holy soldiers, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'asei yedei. Also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a very interesting daf ahead of us. Some fascinating technicalities when it comes to the Misos business. Remember again, yesterday we had the zechus to begin the new parak, and in the new parak again we had an interesting machlokes in the Mishnah about the severity of the Arba Misos, the four different types of death penalties in Beis Din. So we had machlokes in the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Tanakama holding that the order of severity from most severe to least severe is skila, sreifa, hereg, chanek, and Rabbi Shimon holding that the order is sreifa, skila, chanek, and hereg. So then the Gemara began a discussion regarding, in general, when the Gemara brings down an order, so how makbid, right? How meticulous is the Gemara with the particular order that's been espoused? So that's where we left off in the middle of yesterday. The Gemara says, Rav Huna, v'ida, lafuke mitzvahs chalitza. Right? Good. So four lines up from before it gets wide. So Gemara says, Lafukim is chalitza. Now, again, interestingly enough, one of the areas where everyone agrees that the order is really not specific is in the area of chalitza. What happened with chalitza? Listen to this. This is actually a fascinating Gemara. Mitzvahs chalitza. What is the order of chalitza? Now, again, I should have given like a trigger warning. It's a little Yavamas over here, right? So for some of us that might be a little bit difficult, but again, the Gemara says as follows: What is the order of chalitza? Bahu v'yivimto lefnei Beis Din. So what's the halacha? So again, remember, let's frame the case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Reuven has a surviving brother, Shimon. Shimon has a mitzvah of yibum. Shimon doesn't want to do yibum. He does not want to marry his sister-in-law Rachel. So what happens? They come to Beis Din. So we had this in the Gemara. So Beis Din gives Shimon proper eitzah for Shimon. In other words, for Shimon, should Shimon marry her, not marry her, right? So again, Beis Din says, should you do yibum, should you do chalitza? So Shneimar v'karlo zikni ha'ir v'dibra elov v'hi omeres. So she says, Rachel says, my brother-in-law Shimon does not want to marry me. Okay, first white line. He says, yeah, I don't want to marry her. Now, all of this would take place in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, even if that, of course, was not their first tongue. Okay, so then Rachel, the sister-in-law, would go ahead. Just because of Zoom. So the Gemara says, then what would happen? So Rachel would come. V'niksha I love, yivim to I love. Le'nei azakanim. So v'chaltza nalo. She would remove his shoe. V'yarka b'fanav, and she would spit in front of him. Rok hanira l'dayanin, and it had to be enough spit, like saliva, that it was visible to the judges themselves. V'ansa v'amra, she would go ahead and she would say, Kacha ye'aseh li'ish. This is what shall be done to the man who does not want to go ahead and rebuild his brother's home. V'nikra shmo b'Yisrael, and then they would call the brother-in-law Beis Chalutz Hanal. Good. That's the order. That's the order of chalitza. Rabbi Yehuda mitzvahs chalitza. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Now the proper sequence for chalitza is, or I should say, the proper components for chalitza are the following: are Korah v'Koreh. He reads something, she reads something. Cholatzes, she removes the shoe. Rokekes, she spits. Vikara, and she reads something else. Vavinaba, my kamashvalan. So the Gemara says, okay, Rabbi Yehuda, what exactly are you adding to the discussion over here? That's exactly what we just said. You just said what we just said, but you just said it in a short shorter form. So what exactly are you contributing? My kamash malon, masnisin is exactly what the Mishnah just said. Ha kamash malon mitzvah hachi. What Rabbi Yehuda is coming along and saying is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, the order that was just espoused here in the Mishnah, and the order that Rabbi Yehuda himself just went ahead and reviewed, that is the preferred order. That's the preferred order. However, the apich, let's say they reverse the order. Let's say they walk into the basin and the first thing she does is she removes the shoe, right? Or the first thing she does is she spits. So she reverses the order. What's the halacha in that case? Less lanba. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So again, as much as there is an ideal order by chalitza, which we've just seen, halacha l'maisa, if the order is upended, the mitzvah of chalitza is still 100% legitimate. So I'll say, so again, just understand why is this conversation over here? Because remember, what we're fixated on over here is that the Mishnah listed in order, and here in our Mishnah, the order is meaningful. The Gemara was suggesting that in general, whenever the Mishnah makes a list, lists are generally not meaningful. In other words, they're meaningful for the information contained, but lists don't necessarily create a defined order. For example, chalitza, where the Mishnah gives me a list of all the things that happen, but yet again, not necessarily giving me a defined order or sequence in which those things actually have to happen. So that supports this. Whether you went ahead and you took off the shoe first and then you spit, or you spit and then you took off the shoe, Masha asa asui. What's done is done. What's done is done. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa. Again, here's a perfect example of where there is an order that is listed, but the order is non-sequence specific. In other words, if you end up doing something different, halacha l'maisa, you are fine. But let's say, for example, we'll give you other examples where let's say order is specific. What's an example where order is specific? Listen to this. This is not Kohen Gadol mishamish b'shorna kelim. A Kohen Gadol wears 8 different vestments. The hedyot barba, a regular Kohen only wears 4. What are the specific vests? What are the Kohanic clothing? Biksones. Ksones is like a tunic, a coat. Like a tunic. B'michnasayim, pants. B'mitznefes, which is the hat. Avneit, a belt. So those are the 4 basic big day kahuna Kohanic clothing. Most of them Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol wears additional clothing. What else does Kohen Gadol wear? Choshen, a breastplate. Ephod. Ephod, we translate it as like an apron. An apron, it was a garment. It was a garment that went underneath the choshen, that really tied in the back of the Kohen Gadol. So Rashi actually is interesting. Rashi in Parshas Shumar Tetzaveh, Rashi points out, he says, when he tries to comment on what the ephod was, he says, I'm not sure exactly what it looked like, but Rashi says, Libi Omerli, my heart tells me that it's like the apron-like garment that the French women wear by their clothing. So it's interesting also, I'm going to just tie it back, when, Rashi says, what does it mean, Libi Omerli, my heart says to me? This goes back to yesterday's daf, right? What are we learning yesterday's daf? You're like, I have no idea. Right? So yesterday's I heard, Sod Hashem li'yireyav, right? This concept of das Torah, that sometimes, again, people steeped in Torah have an understanding of different things. So Rashi says, and the Lashon, Libi Omerli, my heart tells me, your heart tells you, not your mind yet, because it's not an intellectual thing, it's a heart thing. In other words, that I'm steeped in Torah, so as such, I'm tuned in. My heart tells me that it's like the apron that the French women wear. Incredible. Okay, Me'il, Tzitz is the metal, is the gold plate that the Kohen Gadol wore against his forehead. There was a little bit of a space between his, where the mitznefes started, and on his forehead he wore this tzitz, which said Kodesh La Hashem. Good. So those are the four basic garments of a regular Kohen. Additional 4, we'll call it accessories of a Kohen Gadol. The Gemara V'Tanya, we learned. This is interesting. How do you know that you have to put your pants on first? Right? Good klal for life, right? But in general, right? How do we know that you have to, that again, when the Kohen gets dressed, the first thing he puts on are the michnasayim. So the Gemara says, Shenemar u'michnas seibad yu'al bisaro. The pasuk says again, The michnas seva, literally again, the pants made of linen shall be put on his flesh. The Gemara said, well, 1 second. If that's the case, Vitana, my time actime liksonas. So 1 second. If that's the case, then why does ksonas come first in the pasuk? In other words, here's the interesting point, right? The Gemara says we know that halacha l'maisa, you have to, Kohen has to put on. The Kohen has to go ahead and put on. Most of this is by Parshas Achremos, right? By the Avodah of Yom Kippur. But the Gemara says over here, how do we know that you're supposed to go ahead and put on the pants first? Because umichne seibad yu abisaro. What's the drush over here? Abisaro means the first thing that comes onto your flesh are the michnasayim, are the pants. So Gemara says, okay, I hear that, but if that's the case, why is ksones mentioned first in the pasuk? Because remember, the pasuk begins, ksones bad kodesh yilbash umichnes seibad yu abisaro. So ksones, which is like the tunic, that's mentioned first in the pasuk, but yet you're darshaning that Michnasayim are put on first. So I don't understand. If Michnasayim have to be put on first, then what? What's the logical thing? Mention that first in the pasuk, but you're mentioning ksones first. So what's the pshat? The time of my time actime ksones. Very simple. I'm sorry. The time of my time actime ksones. So we'll say, so therefore, when discussing the various clothing of the Kohen, why does the Tana mention ksones before michnasayim? It's very simple. Mishum da'aktim ekra, because again, ksones comes first in the pasuk. So the Tana is actually mirroring the order of the pasuk. So the pasuk talks about the ksones first. Therefore, the Tana speaks about the ksones first. Even though we know that the first thing the Kohen has to put on is the michnasayim. Ukra, my time aktime. So now we ask Gemara, so this is the question. So why does the pasuk put ksones first? Right? Why not put michnes seibad yu abisaro? Why not start with michnasayim and then go to ksones? That's a good kasha. To which the Gemara says, mishum the mechasye kula gufa adifle or adifale. Because this is actually very beautiful. The michnasayim only cover the bottom part of your body. The ksones covers the entire part of your body. So therefore, a beged, a garment that covers the entirety of the body, has a greater chashivos than a beged that only covers part of the body, and therefore, its chashivos, it is mentioned first. So I will say, but yet, halacha l'maisa, and that is halacha l'maisa, the first thing the Kohen puts on in the morning has to be the michnasayim. And again, here, just to point out, here's another example of where the order is specific. Has to be michnasayim, and then afterwards the other vestments. But why is ksones mentioned first in the pasuk if michnasayim is first to be put on? Ultimately, again, because michnasayim only covers part of the body, ksones covers the entirety of the body. I'll just point out something interesting. If you think about this, also, it's fascinating. There's tremendous Musar Haskell and everything. Sometimes in life, or maybe often in life, when we want to advance ourselves, you ever have that feeling where you feel like stuck a little bit, and you want to figure out how do you get yourself out of your current situation, whether it's from an emotional perspective or a spiritual perspective, and often there's this a little bit of this unknown about where should I start, what should I do with myself to move myself forward. So if you think about it, there's almost two different approaches to change. There's a michnasayim change and a ksones change. Michnasayim change means choose something small and localized. Right? In other words, don't necessarily start looking for something that is comprehensive. Maybe all I need to do in life is a little tweak, like michnasayim. It covers part of the body. So maybe it's just a little tweak here and a little tweak there, and just small adjustments or a small adjustment singular that can make all of the difference. But sometimes in life, a person wants a ksones change. What's a ksones? Ksones is something that covers the entire body. And sometimes to get myself out of where I am, the change has to be something much more comprehensive, something that covers the body in its entirety, something that really, again, not that I'm moving to the other side of the world, but something that goes ahead and really just changes. It's like a paradigm shift in my life. So which one is right? Should you do a michnasayim change or should you do a ksones change? And what's the answer? What's the answer? Yes, and this is interesting because the Torah gives incredible precedence to both. Because on one hand, the first thing mentioned in the pasuk is ksones. That's the first thing mentioned in the pasuk. Because sometimes in life you absolutely need that comprehensive paradigm shift in order to move yourself forward. So it's mentioned first in the pasuk. But yet again, practically, what does the Kohen start with first, very first every single morning? With the mechnasayim, with the pants, the small localized change. So is it a paradigm shift, a comprehensive change, or a localized shift, a mechnasayim change? They're both available to us, and depending where we're holding in life, really determines which type of garment change we need to effect. Tremendous yisod. The Gemara goes weiter. Skila Sreifa. All right, so here we go. So now remember again, the topic of the Mishnah was severity of Misos Bezin. I both say, now, I know some of you may be thinking to yourself, what an odd machlokes, right? Which death penalty is more chamer? Dead is dead, right? Dead is dead, so what does it matter? So of course, what matters, and we'll see this explicitly later on towards the end of the daf, towards the end of, I don't necessarily mean towards the actual end of the daf, because right, but towards the end of our shir, I should have said it like that. Towards the end of our shir is, I'll tell you why it matters. It matters in the following case: a person commits 2 averos, liable to 2 different death penalties. The general halacha is when you kind of like kimle b'drabimine. We know we've seen that concept many times. You do 2 things. You have dual liability, one financial, one capital. So you get the capital liability, but it dispenses with the financial one. Same thing is in terms of death penalties. When you do 2 things and you incur 2 death penalties, you get the more severe of the death penalties. As such, figuring out which one is more severe is actually of practical consequence, not just academic. So that's the tension over here. Okay, so now we are machlokes in our Mishnah. So once again, just to review our orders, Tanakama said severity is skila, streifa, hereg, chenek. Skila, streifa, hereg, chenek. Okay, stoning, burning. Again, we haven't seen what streifa is. Really, only misa that we've really gone through exhaustively is skila. The other 3 we'll get there, but we haven't done it yet. It's burning, hereg, which is death by sword, bepashtos, beheading, and chenek, strangulation. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon disagrees on 2 points. Rabbi Shimon holds streifa, skila. So he puts streifa in front of skila, and he puts chenek, strangulation, in front of hereg. Okay, so 2-prong machlokes, Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Okay, here we go. So this Gemara will say, really, actually, the Gemara is going to flow pretty seamlessly. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, skila chamura b'streifa. Skila is more chamer than streifa. Now, why is skila more chamer than streifa? So we'll say it's interestingly enough because who gets skila? Skila is given to the megadef. Megadef is one who blasphemes, who curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu and oved avodah zarah. So we'll say, so these are considered to be major infractions because they are rebellions against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, one who goes ahead and curses Hashem chas v'shalom, one who worships avodah zarah, gets skila. So the fact that skila is given to these individuals for this type of averos indicates to us that skila is more chamer than streifa, supporting obviously the position of Tanakama. My chumrah. What's the chumrah? In other words, why do you think that these averos are so severe? Shekein poshet yado beikar. Because again, the act of cursing God and worshiping avodah zarah are acts of direct rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So because of that gives them their severity. I can see just the opposite. Streifa chamura. Streifa is going to be more chamura. Why? Shekei nitna lebas kohen shezinsa. Because again, interestingly enough, that halacha lemaisa about we're going to see about. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this case. Torah speaks about again if the daughter of a kohen commits adultery. She is given the penalty of streifa, which is interesting because generally, again, adultery is not punishable by streifa. So we'll see she gets a special punishment of sreifa. So the fact that she's singled out, the fact that when a bas kohen, daughter of a kohen, commits adultery, again we'll have to discuss, is this during irisin, is this during nisuin, we'll get into all of that, but the fact that she's singled out for a punishment of sreifa indicates to us that sreifa is more chamer. Or my chumrah, what's the chumrah over here? Shekin mechaleles asaviha. Because again, when a bas, daughter of a kohen, goes ahead and commits adultery, not only is she committing a terrible avera herself, but she is what's the right word? Not maligning, but she is what was it? Profaning, right? Profaning. By like humiliating her father, right? The Kohen has an exalted status within Klal Yisrael. His child does something terrible that not only is a reflection on the child, but ultimately a reflection on the parents. Take a look at the last Rashi before I turn the page. Shekain. Michalalas as Savia, Kedika Amrit Lekaman, as we'll see later on. So we're going to see that there's tremendous blowback on the Kohanic parents when their child does something like this. So the fact that she singled out for Sreifa would indicate to us that Sreifa is more chama. Top of Nun. Kasavi Rabbanan. So the Rabbanan on the other hand hold. So we'll say, so now remember, so that is a proof to Rabbi Shimon. So what do the Rabbanan do with the fact that the daughter of a Kohen who committed adultery is singled out with Sreifa? What do they do with that? Top of Nun. Kasavi Rabbanan. Nisua yotzil Sreifa velo arusa. So Rabbanan hold like this. They hold that it's only a Nesua, right? Only a Nesua who is subjected to Sreifa, and not an Arusa. Take a look at Rashi again. Nesua, Bas Kohen Yotza Mechlal Nesua, Bas Yisrael Mechenek L'Sreifa. Aval Arusa, the Gabi Bas Yisrael, Beskila, Lo Yotza, Bas Kohen Mechlal Arusa, Bas Yisrael. So interestingly enough, according to the Rabbanan, they hold that an Arusa Bas Kohen who commits adultery is the same thing as an Arusa Bas Yisrael, right? Both of them are going to be by Skila. The only difference is if a Nesua Bas Kohen, a Bas Kohen who is in Nesua commits adultery, so whereas normally the punishment for adultery would be chenek for a bas kohen who is married, who is in a suah, who commits adultery, the penalty is going to be sreifa. Umida'afki rachmana la'arusa b'skila, and now since the Torah singled out an arusa bas kohen for skila, shmamina skila chamura. You see from here that skila is more chamer. Okay, skila chamura misayif. Next, the Gemara goes on. Skila is more chamer than sayif. Remember again, sayif is death by beheading with a sword. So the Gemara says shekain nitna lemegadef ula oved avodas kochavim. Because again, you see that skila is the punishment given to someone who curses God and worships idolatry. Umay chumra. What's unique about these two infractions? Kidam rinan. As we said before, shekain poshet yado beikar. Because remember again, these averos represent a direct rebellion against the Ribono Shalom. Adrabah, I can say just the opposite. Saif Chomer. Ultimately, again, beheading should be more chamer. Why? Shekenitan la'anshe nir hanidachas. Oh, interesting. Well, so what's in Ir Nidachas? Ir Nidachas is a city which has worshipped idolatry. The halach is the entire city is wiped out. And how is it wiped out? Ultimately, it was saif, by sword. So you see from here, the fact that saif is the punishment for Ir Nidachas would indicate to us that saif is more chamer. Umay chumra. And ultimately, what's the chumra of Ir Nidachas? Shekin mamonan avad. Because remember, by Ir Nidachas, what do you destroy? What do you destroy by Ir Nidachas? Everything. Everything is destroyed. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, maybe that's the chomer by Ir Nidachas, and therefore, Saif should be the most chomer. To which the Gemara says, Amrit, Eiza Koach Meruba. So tell me, which one is more severe? Koach Hamadiach or Koach Hanidach? What's more severe? The one who incites everyone to worship Avodah Zarah, or the one who goes ahead and worships Avodah Zarah himself? Who's worse? Havi Omer, Koach Hamadiach. I would say the inciter, right? The one who riles everyone up to worship Avodah Zarah. He's worse. And then, what do we learn? Tanya, Madichi Er Nidachas Beskila. And again, the inciter, you're right. An Ir Nidachas itself is wiped out by Saif. But the inciters, the ringleaders, they are killed how? With Skila. So again, who's worth? The inciter or the incitee? And the answer is the inciter, of course. And yet he's punished by Skila. So you see from here that Skila is more chamer. We'll say also tremendous Moser Haskell. Remember, we have a general klal that says whatever is true by Ra, whatever is true in the negative, is always more true in the positive. So you see from here that one who incites others to do Avodah Zarah, one who says us do Avodah Zarah is clearly held with greater contempt and culpability than the ones who worship Avodah Zarah themselves, which makes sense. So let's say if that's true in the negative, alachas kama v'kama, if a person encourages or quote unquote incites others to do good. Sometimes we'll say we forget that we have the incredible ability to go ahead and get other people excited about doing good. Each of us has the ability to be a ringleader in the positive. And when I push myself and I engage in dynamic, beautiful spiritual growth, others see that. And if I can onboard others, it's a tremendous zuchus. And if you see that the inciters of Avodah Zarah are held culpable, halachas kama v'kama, those who encourage their chaverim, their friends, to go ahead and do even better, regain even more schar than for the mitzvos that they themselves perform. It's incredible. Samar goes weiter. The Gemara goes weiter. Skila chamura mechanek. Skila is more chamer than chanek. Shekein nitan lemegadef ula oved kochavim. Ula oved avos chavim. So again, skila is more chamer than chanek because again, skila is given to those who worship avodah zara and ultimately again to those who curse the Kodesh Baruch Hu. My chumra. What's the chumra of megadef and oved avodas kochavim? Kedamra. That's what we said before. Shekein poshet yado beikar because the act of cursing God and the act of worshiping avodah zara represents a direct rebellion against the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I can say just the opposite. Chenek chamar, strangulation should be more chamar. Why? Shekei nitan lemake aviv v'imo. Wow. Let's say if a person hits his parents, hits his father or his mother, the penalty for hitting your parents is chenek, is strangulation. So maybe you see from here that chenek is more chamar than skila. Or my chumra. Again, so what's the chumra in hitting your parents? In other words, what's the severity of that act? Shekein hukash kvodan l'chvod hamakom. It's profound because the kavod I give to my parents is compared to the kavod I give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Ishimo v'aviv tiro. That's like Yisrael. So again, the Torah equates it's the kavod to parents, ultimately again to the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, again, perhaps you see, and therefore the halacha is that if you hit your parents, you get chenek. So maybe chenek is most severe. Maybe chenek is most severe. To which the Gemara says, Rashi says over here, good, fine. Let's go weiter. Midafki rachmana la'arusa. So the Gemara says, Midafki rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nesua. So listen to this. So now the Gemara says as follows: Midafki rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nesua bas Yisrael. So the fact that the Torah has distinguished between an arusa bas Yisrael who commits adultery from an nesua bas Yisrael from chenek l'skila, and moves her from chenek to skila. In other words, the fact that an arusa who commits adultery gets a different penalty than an asua who commits adultery, and we move it from chenek to skila, right? So again, shma mina skila chamura. Essentially, what the Gemara says is like this: the fact that there's a deviation in punishment from an arusa to an asua, right? General adultery is punishable by chenek, but yet an arusa who commits adultery is going to get skila. The fact that there's deviation would lend us to imagine that skila is going to be more chamer. Okay. Streifa chamura misayif. Streifa is more chamur than sayif. Burning, which we're going to say doesn't actually mean burning someone, it's actually molten lead that's poured down the throat of the individual, which we'll talk about. Streifa is more chamur than sayif, than death by sword. Why? Shekeinitin lebas koin shezinsa. Because we'll say, aloha lamaisa, if the daughter of a Kohen commits adultery, she is judged with sreifa. So Gemara says, "Umay chumra." What's the severity of her act? Shekin mechaleles es aviha, because she profanes her father, right? She demeans her father through her negative behavior. Either Rabbi, I could say just the opposite. Sayif chamer. No, sayif should be more chamer. Why? Shekin nitin anshe ir hanidachas. Because again, the people of the ir hanidachas, as we just mentioned before, are wiped out by sayif. Umay chumra. What's the chumra of ir hanidachas? Shekin mamon avad. Because when you destroy ir hanidachas, you destroy everything. Ne'emar, so the Gemara says, Ne'emar aviyah b'skila, v'ne'emar aviyah b'sreifa. So the pasuk used lashon of aviyah by skila. This is talking about again the daughter of the Kohen who goes ahead and commits adultery. So it says aviyah by skila, and it says aviyah by sreifa. Ma aviyah ha'amar b'skila, skila chamura misayif. So just like again, when it says aviyah by skila, skila is more chayiv than sayif. Af aviyah ha'amar b'sreifa, sreifa chamura misayif. So to the aviyah that it says by sreifa indicates to us that sreifa is more chamur than sayif. Okay. Well, it says Sreifa chamura mechanek. So Sreifa is going to be more chamur than chanek. Shekei nitna lebas koin shezinsa. Because what as we just said before, Sreifa is given to Bas Kohen who goes ahead and commits adultery. So again, the fact that she's singled out for this punishment indicates to us that it is more chamur. Umay chumra, what is the chumra? In other words, what is the severity of a Bas Kohen who commits adultery? Kida Amra, that's as we said before, because she embarrasses, humiliates, and profanes her father. Adrabah, because it's just the opposite. Chenek chamur, strangulation should be even more. Why? Shekei nitein lemakya avivimo. Because again, chenek is the punishment for hitting your parents. What's the severity of the act of striking one's parents? Because ultimately, again, the kavod to parents is compared to the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To which the Gemara says, this goes back to what we said before. The fact that a Nesua, right? A Bas Kohen who is fully married, right, commits adultery, gets a different punishment than a regular married woman who commits adultery, and it changes her from chenek to sreifa, right? Normally the punishment for adultery is chenek. But if a Bas Kohen, Nesua, goes ahead and commits adultery, she gets sreifa. So what does that show you? Shmamina, sreifa chamura. That shows you that sreifa is more chamur ultimately again than chenek. Okay, sayif chamur mechenek. Saif is more chamer than chanek. So the Gemara says, Shekein nitan la'anshi ir hanidachas. Because once again, people of ir hanidachas are killed by Saif. Adraba, chanek chamer. Chanek should be more chamer. Why? Shekein nitan l'makya of avimo. Because that's what you get for striking your parents. Says the Gemara, my chumrah. Once again, what's the severity of striking parents? Shekein hukash. Because remember again, the covet of parents is compared to the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Afilu hachi poshet yado beikar adif. Nevertheless, the Gemara says we consider it to be the supreme infraction. Supreme infraction is a rebellion directly against the authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what are those averos? That's megadef, cursing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and oved avodah zarah. Those are considered to be like the supreme averos. And the fact that those supreme averos are punishable by what? By skila, indicates to us that skila sits at the top of the Misas Beis Din pyramid. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says also. Remember again, fine, that was Tanakama. Now Rabbi Shimon comes along, Rabbi Shimon upends the Rabbi Shimon says, number one, Sreifa is more chamer than skila. And number two, chanek is more chamer than hereg. So in Rabbi Shimon's model, it's sreifa, skila, chanek, hereg. Says the Gemara, sreifa chamura miskila. So Rabbi Shimon says sreifa is more chamer than skila. Why? Shekei nitna lebas kohen shezinsa, because this is the punishment for the daughter of a kohen who commits adultery. The Gemara says, my chumra. What's the chumra? What's the severity of this act of a bas kohen who commits adultery? Shekei michaleles es aviha. She's profaning and demeaning and denigrating her father. Adrabah, we'll say end of the first wide line. Adrabah, skila chamura. I say the skila is more chamer. Why? Second wide line. Shekei nitna lemegade because again, that is the punishment for one who curses Hashem or worships idolatry. Umay chumra, what's the severity of the act of Makadeh for Ovid Avodah Zarah? Very simple. Poshet, shekin poshet, yado be'ikr. So the Gemara says, how does Rabbi Shimon answer? Rabbi Shimon tamei. Rabbi Shimon goes according to his reason. What does Rabbi Shimon say? Da'amar, achas arusa va'achas nesua, yosei l'sreifa. Rabbi Shimon holds like this, that in general, by adultery, whether a woman is an arusa or a nesua, halacha l'maisa, the act of adultery is punishable by sreifa. But the fact that the Torah goes ahead and singles out a bas kohen who's in arusa, right, who commits adultery, michlal arusa bas yisrael miskila l'sreifa, and singles her out from, or distinguishes her from a regular arusa bas yisrael, and switches her punishment from skila to sreifa, shmamina sreifa chamura. Okay, that says that's Rabbi Shimon's model. Rabbi Shimon's entire thesis kind of rests on Arusa Bas Kohen who commits adultery. She is singled out from any other construct of adultery, and ultimately, again, the punishment that she is given is sreifa. Is sreifa. And therefore Rabbi Shimon says, you see from here that sreifa is with, but I just want to point out, it's interesting, in Rabbi Shimon's model, why is it that an arusa bas kohen would be singled out for the worst punishment? So it's interesting, if you think about it, there's two things happening over here. Someone, she's a bas kohen. She's bas kohen. So Kohanim are held to a higher standard, and the children of Kohanim are held to a higher standard. What's interesting is, it seems to correct Rabbi Shimon, we'll get into this a little bit more tomorrow and the next day, which is, it almost appears that adultery by an arusa is even more severe than an adultery by an asua, right? What's the logic? There's almost like a heightened immorality, because an arusa she hasn't lived with her husband, which means she has not had an intimate life yet. So this idea that a woman who has not yet experienced intimacy with her husband is already out and about, committing adultery, almost seems to compound the severity of the act. Again, we'll see it more because it's interesting, because Rabbi Shimon's model is Arusa Bas Kohen is the most severe punishment. And the punishment that she's getting ultimately, again, is going to be Sreifa. Okay, and therefore, that puts Rabbi Shimon Sreifa on the top of the pyramid. Sreifa Chamura Mechanek. Sreifa is more Chamur than Chanek. Why? Shekin Nitna Lebas Kohen Shezinsa. because it's given to a bas kohen who goes in and committed adultery. My chumrah, what's the chumrah? Kidaminon, that's because she humiliated her father. And Rabba, chenek chamar. I'll say the chenek is chamar. Why? Shekein nital maka aviv imo, because chenek is what you get for striking your parents. Or my chumrah, shekein hukash kvodam lehukash hamakam, lehukash kvodam makom. Because again, the covenant of parents is compared ultimately to the covenant of parents is compared to the covenant of Chalash Baruch Hu. Midav kirach manal nesubas kohen mechlan nesubas yisra mechanek l'sreifa. So the fact that the Torah removed a nesua bas kohen from general nesua bas Yisrael, right? Generally, the punishment for adultery is chenek, but yet the nesua bas Yisrael, nesua bas kohen gets streifa. Shmamina streifa chamura. Good. Streifa chamura misayif. Ultimately, again, streifa is more chamer than saif. Where do we know? The shekin nitna lebas kohen shezinsa, because it is the punishment for a bas kohen who commits adultery. Umay chumra kidam. What's the severity of the act of a bas kohen who commits adultery? Kidamron. That's what we said before. That halacha l'maisa. She profanes her father. Adarabba, Saif Chamer. Saif is more Chamer. Why? Shekenitan la'anshe ir hanidachas. Because ultimately, an ir hanidachas is wiped out with Saif. Umay Chumra. What's the Chumra? Shekein mamonam avad. Because ultimately, again, all their property is destroyed. As the Gemara says. Amrit v'chi eiza koach meruba. What is worse? What is worse? Koach hamadiach or koach hanidach? What's worse? The one who is the inciter or the incitees? Amud beis. Havi omer koach hamadiach. I would say, obviously, it is the inciter, right? The one who incites others to sin is obviously worse than the one who commits the avera himself. The Gemara says, "V'kal v'chomer uma chenek sheka." The Gemara says, "V'kal v'chomer uma chenek shechamer misayif streifa chamura mimenu." Seif chenek, which is more chamer than saif. Streifa is more chamer than it. Therefore, again, saif hakal l'kol shekain, all the more so by saif. Okay, skila chamura mechenek. Skila is more chamer than chenek. Why? Shekein nitna lemegadef for the ovid avodas kachavim, because it is the punishment for the megadef and for one who goes ahead and worships idolatry. Umay chumra. What's the chumra? What's the chumrah? Kidam Rinan. Rabbi says, as we said before, because she came poshet yado beikar. Because halacha l'maisa, such a person is actively rebelling against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adrabah, I can say just the opposite. Chanek chamor, right? Strangulation is even worse. Why? Shekin nitar l'make avivimo, because that's the punishment given to striking parents. Umay chumrah. What's the chumrah involved with striking parents? And like we said before, shekin hukash kvodam l'chavod hamakom. The covenant of parents is compared ultimately to the covenant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To which the Gemara says, "Mida'afki rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nusua bas Yisrael." Once again, since the Torah excluded an arusa bas Yisrael from nusua bas Yisrael, right? There's a different punishment for arusa and nusua. Mechenek l'skila, from chenek to skila. Shmamina skila chamura. You see from here that skila is more chamer than chenek. Okay, skila chamura misayif. Skila is more chamer than sayif. Shekein nitna lemegadef, because again, one who curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu and one who worships of all the Zara gets punished by skila. Adrabah, I can see just the opposite. Sayif chamer. Sayif is more chamer. Why? Shekein nitna la'anshe ir nidachas. So Gemara says, because again, remember, Saif is the punishment for the people of the Ir Nidachas. Umay chumrah. What is the chumrah of Ir Nidachas? Shekein mamonam avad. Because by Ir Nidachas, everything is wiped out, even the property. 1 second. But I will say, which one is more severe? Was a lot of the same conversations. Hamadiach or koach hanidach? Who's more severe? The inciter or the incitee? Right? Who's more severe? The one who incites everyone to worship Avodah Zarah, or the ones who actually worship? Havi Omer koach hamadiach. It's obviously the inciter. And I will say again, and what punishment does the inciter get? What does he get? He gets skila. He gets skila. So whereas Ir Nidachas is wiped out with Saif, the inciter himself gets skila. Now what do you see from here? V'kavachomer umachenek shechamer misayif skila chamura mimenu. So chenek, which is more chamer than Saif, but yet skila is more chamer than chenek. Saif hakal kol shekin. Certainly skila is going to be more chamer than Saif. Okay. The Gemara says chenek chamor misayif. Chenek is more chomer than Saif. Because ultimately, again, Chenek is what you get chas v'shalom for striking your parents. Ayu my chumrah. What's the severity of the act of striking your parents? Kida amra. That's what we just said before. That Allah said the kavod due to parents is like the kavod due to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adrabah. It's just the opposite. Saif chomer. Saif is more chomer. Why? Because again, remember, Saif is the punishment for the people of the Ernidachas. I says my chumrah. What's the chumrah? What's the chumrah? Shekin mamonam avad. Ultimately, again, because remember, by Ernidachas, all of the property is wiped out. But still, which one is more severe? Koach hamadiach or koach hanidach? Is it ultimately, again, the inciter or the incitees? So the Gemara says, koach hanidach. I'm sorry. Havi Omer Koach Hamadiach. It's obviously the inciter. The Gemara says, Havi Omer Koach Hamadiach. V'tanya Madichi Erni Dachos B'skila Rabbi Shimon or B'chanek. And I will say we see over here that Allah Lamaisa, the inciter, is with skila, and everyone else ultimately again. Everyone else is going to be with Saif. Incredible, right? Rabbi Shimon says, right? Rabbi Shimon says by Chenek. Good. So I'll say, so now we've just established the two models, the model of the Tanakama and the model of Rabbi Shimon, each really laying out their respective arguments. So the Gemara goes back a little bit. Margala b'pumid Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say there was now Margala b'pumid Rabbi Yochanan means that there was something that Rabbi Yochanan was accustomed to. It literally means there was a jewel in the mouth of Rabbi Yochanan, which bepashtos means that there was something he used to say frequently. What would he say? Nara murasa bas kohen shezin sabeskila. Supposed to listen to this. If you have a nara murasa, but this is a girl who had erisin, who is a bas kohen. So okay, let's just say it differently. A bas kohen who is an arusa, who goes ahead and commits adultery. What's talacha? Beskila. She gets skila. Rabbi Shimon says b'streifa. Rabbi Shimon disagrees and he says Shrefer. And I will say, just want to point out, this very much is at the root of our machlokes of the Mishnah, right? Remember again, like I said before, everyone is going to agree that interestingly enough, a Bas Kohen Arusa who commits adultery is deserving of the most severe death penalty. Why? Again, we'll discuss. But she is. So again, Tanakam Rabbanan say skila. Rabbi Shimon says Sreifa. I'm sure it's Sreifa. Now, Zin Sameaviha. Now, interestingly enough, what happens if halacha l'maisa, the person she commits adultery with is her father? So the Gemara says, Shimon Omer Zin Sameaviha b'skila, Rabbi Shimon Omer b'sreifa. If she committed adultery with her father, ultimately again, then it's b'skila. Rabbi Shimon says Sreifa. So the Gemara says, My kamash malon. So again, what exactly are the Rabbana coming to teach us? That Nisua Yatsa L'Sreifa V'lo Arusa. According to the Rabbanan, it's only a Bas Kohen Nisua who gets Sreifa. Remember, on both sides, normally the punishment for adultery is Chenek. A Bas Kohen is going to be treated differently. Is that halacha l'maisa? She's going to go ahead and get. It's only Nesua who gets sreifa and not an arusa, right? The arusa will get skila. The Rabbi Shimon achas arusa va'achas Nesua yatzu l'sreifa. According to Rabbi Shimon, a bas kohen is dealt with stringently across the board. Whether it's irisin or nisuin, she's going to get sreifa. The time of my, what's the reason for this? Mishum l'Rabbanan skila chamura or Rabbi Shimon sreifa chamura. Again, I will say it's very simple. Remember, everyone is agreeing that a Bas Kohen is going to go ahead, who is Mizana, who commits adultery, is going to get the most severe penalty. Now again, whether that's a Bas Kohen Arusa and Nisua, or just an Arusa, that's a Machlokes also. But the Machlokes is most severe penalty. According to the Rabbanan, that is going to be Skila. According to Rabbi Shimon, ultimately, again, that is going to be Shrefer. And I will say, a lot of this also is obviously the discussion about how they're going to go ahead and interpret the psukim. I just want to point out over here, both say that there are two psukim. One pasuk says, "Ubas ish kohen ki secha liznos." If the daughter of a kohen will commit adultery, esavia hi mechaleles, she profanes her father. Ba'esh tisaref. Sreifa. There's another pasuk. V'otzias hanara pesach beisavia uskalua anshe ira ba'avanim umesa. Another pasuk of a bas kohen who commits adultery, and it's skila. It's skila. So now, we'll say, so again, the shaila is going to be how each is interpreting the pasuk to refer to which thing. But the point of it for our purposes over here is the bas kohen who is mizana is going to get the most severe punishment. According to the Rabbanan, that's going to be skila. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it's going to be streifa. So Gemara says, it's interesting. At the end of this whole discussion, the Gemara says, nafka mina lami, nafka mina lami. So at the end of the day, ultimately, again, who cares? Like, dead is dead, as we just said before. No, it matters, as we just said before. The Mishnah is chayiv, shtei misos bezdin, nidonim bechamura. So again, it would have been nice to have that line at the beginning of the Gemara, right? But Lamais again, the Gemara says, so like, why are we doing all this, right? Why trying to figure out which is the more severe death penalty? You know, it matters because if someone did two things, two acts, which are both liable to two different death penalties, we give them the more severe of the two. So knowing which is more severe is of absolute importance. The Gemara goes right there. Good. We'll say, by the way, I just want to point out something so interesting. If you think about it, the lashon of margala bepume d'Rabbi Yochanan. Now, normally when you see that expression, what usually follows it? Some like beautiful expression. Right? You know, Rabbi Yochanan had this jewel in his mouth, right? There's this thing that he always used to say. Everybody, people sometimes have like that thing that they say. Hey, so the Margala Bapume is such a beautiful, lofty expression. Here, I'm not going to lie, like I got excited when I was looking at the daf yesterday. I'm like, oh, maybe it's like a little bit of a break from all of this stuff, right? We're going to see some beautiful, lofty idea. And yet, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, what's the Margali B'Pumid Rabbi Yochanan? Margali B'Pumid Rabbi Yochanan was that Nara Murasa Bas Kohen who commits adultery gets skila. Rabbi Shimon says that it's streifa. And this was the thing that Rabbi Yochanan always said. First of all, again, clearly don't ask Rabbi Yochanan to say a Dvar Torah at the Shabbos table, right? That's number one, right? But what's the pshat that this is the thing he always said? So most is to just understand that. Again, we'll talk about this more, but there's an incredible profundity in this. What's the whole idea of this bas kohen? What's the whole idea of the bas kohen? The bas kohen is that what we do is a reflection on our parents. And what we do is a reflection on our family. And what we do is a reflection on the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Sometimes we think that we exist in a vacuum, so I could do whatever I want because it's just contained to me. It's not true. What I do, how I behave, how I conduct myself is not only, I will say, reflective on my family, by Bas Kohen, it's reflective on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will say there's a beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says very quickly, the Torah says, you have to love Hashem. So we'll say, what's the great problem with the mitzvah of Hashem? What's the problem with it? You can't regulate emotions. You can't tell someone how to love you. You can't force someone to love you. That's why Rashi HaKadosh says, Asay devarav me'ava. When you serve Hashem, make it look like you love Him. Make it look like, whether you love him or not, that's inconsequential, right? Fake it till you make it, right? Go ahead and at least make it look like you love what you're doing, and one day you'll come to love it as well. But the Gemara gives another interpretation. The Gemara says, Shetehei Shem Shamayim Misahiv Al Yadecha. That ultimately, again, the job of a Yid is to make the Ribono Shel Olam beloved in the eyes of other people. That's the goal, to be an ambassador of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to understand each of us are an ambassador of the Ribono Shel Olam. What happens when you're an ambassador? What happens when you're an ambassador? I don't know, but I would assume what happens when you're an ambassador is you represent your host nation. So you show up at an event, right? You are the representative of the United States of America, right? Everything you do represents the entire identity of the country. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? I'm an ambassador of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what I do and how I live is a representation of the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Perhaps that's why this was Margalei Pumid Rabbi Yochanan. What is Rabbi Yochanan saying? When a Bas Kohen commits adultery, what she's doing is, and we'll get into this more, it's a horrible reflection on her upbringing. It's a horrible reflection on her parents' home. What was the chinuch? What was the chinuch, right? What's happening? What does this represent? Why? Because the daughter of the Kohen, again, is supposed to represent a lofty level. So what she does reflects her parents. What we do, I will say, what we do reflects not only our parents, reflects not only our people, but what we do is a reflection on HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. We are the ambassadors of the Ribono Shel Olam. And to live life with that idea, that what I do, a lot of times if it's just me, I'll do certain things. If I know that I'm representing others, I know that I have to act in a different way. Halachas kama v'kama, when I'm representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how much more refined my actions have to be. Perhaps that's why it's the Margala Bepumid Rabbi Yochanan. To live life with a recognition that what you do and how you act represents other people, not just your parents, not just your family, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, that is a profound way to live. And that is a profound yesod to keep with you throughout life. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. My Rabbi Shimon. So what's Rabbi Shimon? So the Gemara says, what's Rabbi Shimon? Good. Design Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shnei Klalos Nemru Bas Kohen. There are two rules said about a Bas Kohen. The Bas Kohen v'lo Bas Yisrael. So ultimately, again, we're going to see what are these two klalos. If you look at Rashi says over here, no, number one, Bas Kohen v'lo Bas Yisrael. So these two rules were said only by a Bas Kohen, not by a Bas Yisrael. Ema af bebas Kohen v'hotzia kasav nesua mechlal nesua v'arusa mechlal arusa. Everybody say, you know what, we're going to stop over here for today. We'll pick up with this Rabbi Shimon and Mir Hashem tomorrow. Again, and what we'll do tomorrow is, toward the beginning of the show, we'll do the Rambam, so we'll see exactly how we pass in terms of the severity of the misos. Based in, let's say, shkoyach. All right, Chavrans, we'll have a great day, everyone.